It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. Net migration to the UK hits a record high as last year's figures are revised up to nearly 750,000 people. In Dublin, violent clashes between police and protesters hours after a woman and 3 young children were injured in a knife attack.
Also coming up on Sky News at 10, we're live in Israel as the families of hostages are given fresh hope. Qatar says Hamas will release more than a dozen people tomorrow as a 4-day truce is set to begin in Gaza.
Also ahead, a surprise win in the Dutch election. An anti-immigration populist surges to victory. We hear how Geert Wilders' message resonated for some. Plus, the Barber of Seville gets a Yorkshire twist. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello there, good evening. A slap in the face for the British public. That's the verdict tonight of the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, as net migration to the UK reaches a record high. Well, despite government promises to bring those figures down, today, last year's figure was in fact revised up, revealing nearly 750,000 more people arrived in the UK than left. Well, tonight we'll take a deeper look at what's behind those figures and we'll get the view of voters in Birmingham. So the latest figures from the Office for National Statistics show net migration to the UK was far higher than previously thought last year. In the year to December 2022, it hit a record-breaking 745,000. That is 139,000 more than the previous ONS estimate in May of 606,000. Well, figures for this year are lower. The latest estimate is for 672,000 people in the 12 months to June 2023. While for the period from July 2019, just before the last election, to June 2023, total estimated UK net migration was 1.6 million. Our first report tonight is from our communities correspondent, Becky Johnson.
An authentic curry cooked with flair by skilled chefs from Pakistan. At this restaurant in Birmingham, they say recruitment from abroad is key to their success. Sidesh came to the UK from India on a student visa in January, but he plans to stay and work when his course ends.
I like to convert my visa to a work visa.
And how long would you like to stay?
Maybe 5 years at least. I will be staying in this country, earning good amount of money, earning good amount of respect, and learning many new things. So I'm doing it.
Without foreign workers, the manager says they'd struggle as British people don't apply when they advertise.
People are not interested to come into the hospitality sector as a waiter, as a chef.
And at this nearby garage, they've been trying to recruit a mechanic locally for 2 years with no success.
Trying to hire a mechanic is like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Because if you're a mechanic and you're from the UK, you become self-employed. Why would you want to be employed?
It means he's now looking in Pakistan.
We can give somebody an opportunity to get out of a life of poverty and help bring his family here.
But the ever-increasing numbers of immigrants are politically problematic for the Conservative Party. Record numbers of people are coming to the UK via legal routes. The number of work visas handed out to people from outside the EU has soared. It dwarfs the amount of people coming in via illegal routes like small boats and poses a big problem for a government that has promised to get net migration down. A pledge many voters will judge them on. What would you like to see the government do?
That's the reason why we came out of Brexit, wasn't it? For this reason, so it needs clamping down more than it. So.
The country needs skilled workers, so legal migration, I'm all in favour.
We are obviously bursting at the seam here, so we expect the government to step up and do something, don't we?
The row over how to stop small boats crossing the channel has masked a much greater number of people coming to the country legally. And for a government eyeing an election, the figures are heading in the wrong direction. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Birmingham.
Well, migration has long been an issue plaguing the Conservative Party. At the last election, the Tories promised to bring overall numbers down, with the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson pledging to get annual net migration below 250,000 people. But as today's figures show, the trajectory has in fact been in the opposite direction. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, has been digging into the numbers.
Some really interesting migration figures have just come through. Very striking indeed. This is showing you net migration, so the number of people coming in minus those who are leaving the country. And last time around, that's what the line looked like, very high indeed. The latest figures show it's even higher. It's even higher. It does look like it's coming down, but those numbers could well be revised. And it got up to over 700,000 in 2022. But even more striking is if you look back through history. So we're going to take that same statistic, net migration, as a percentage of the population, going all the way back to the Victorian period here. And, well, you can see the story. We have never seen anything quite like this. Actually, for most of the 19th century, people were leaving the country in net terms. But then you have this kind of period, hundreds of thousands under David Cameron, and then post-Brexit, it went through the roof. And when we just look back at those more recent numbers, OK, there's a bit of context it's worth just remembering here. Of course, 2016, you had Brexit, the EU referendum. Then you had COVID, so you can probably note that period there. So, migration dropping down a lot there, a lot of people leaving as well. But then it's those new Brexit rules and new immigration rules coming in that really kickstarts that big leap in migration, in net migration. And when you look at where people are coming from or indeed going to, well, this is EU citizens. And you can see before Brexit, it was relatively strong, hundreds of thousands, and then into negative territory after Brexit. That's EU citizens leaving the UK. Then you've got UK citizens, and then consider this, non-EU citizens coming into the UK in their droves, really, faster than we've ever seen before. And the interesting thing is, if we break that down, so dig into those red bars and just look at what are the reasons that people are coming for, a lot of it is work. A lot of it is work. Actually, the second biggest chunk is work. But then you've got studies. So students, and particularly after Brexit, those new rules came in, a lot of students coming into the UK. And then you've got, well, other categories. But notably, look at this. This is Ukraine and Hong Kong. So big numbers coming in from Ukraine and Hong Kong. But it's not actually enough to explain the big leap. It's much smaller than this, much smaller than work as well. And also worth saying as well, you've got illegal immigration as well. It's quite a small slice. It's about kind of 50,000 compared to these big numbers here. But let's dig in finally to work, because it's worth just asking, where are people working? Where are they coming to work? And you've got various different strands we can break this down to. You've got temporary workers, other work as well. But if you look at skilled work, the main thing that sticks out is this. Look, it's health and care. People are coming from around the world, particularly non-EU, to work in the health system, in the NHS. That is a big part of the explanation, alongside study, for why you see those unprecedented numbers of migration. When I say unprecedented, this is really one of the most striking things we've seen in the country recently, a massive increase in the number of people coming here.
Conway there. Well, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is live in Downing Street this evening. We remember back in the day, John, when David Cameron promised to get it down to the tens of thousands. Clearly not the case. So how awkward is this for the government, and what will they do about it?
Well, Mr Cameron wasn't the only one, of course, who made a bold pledge to get immigration down. Boris Johnson talked about getting down to 250,000. And the figure's now about 3 times that. Rishi Sunak doesn't go in for targets on immigration. Too embarrassing, really. He's just pledged to bring the numbers down. But what's happened today is that James Cleverly, the new Home Secretary, has really been accused of some complacency by Tory MPs after he said the figure wasn't showing a significant increase from last year's figure and was largely in line with our own immigration statistics. Well, a backlash was led by Suella Braverman, who, let's not forget, was Home Secretary until only 10 days ago. She said that we were elected on a pledge to reduce net migration, which she says was 229,000 in 2019. Today's record numbers, she says, are a slap in the face to the British public, who voted to control and reduce migration at every opportunity. So, what's going to come next? Well, Mr. Cleverly's talking about cracking down on visas, perhaps more curbs on students, more curbs on foreign workers, perhaps even in health and care. And that's on course, as well as the pledge to have a new treaty with Rwanda and legislation to try and make that policy work. So embarrassing, coming after a fairly well-received autumn statement. Yet again, more problems for the Prime Minister.
John, they're in Downing Street. Thank you. Well, in Dublin tonight, a developing story. Protesters have clashed with police after a knife attack in the city centre. Violence broke out hours after the attack, after speculation about the alleged perpetrator's nationality. Police and politicians have called for calm and warned against misinformation. Tonight, a 5-year-old girl is receiving emergency treatment after being seriously injured in the stabbing. Our Ireland correspondent, Stephen Murphy, has more.
A day that began in shock turned into an evening of raw anger. For hours after the mass stabbing attack outside a primary school, hundreds of people, fueled by angry online speculation over the suspect's nationality, took over the main street of Ireland's capital. Shops on O'Connell Street were looted. Buses, trams and a police car were all set alight as the police struggled to bring the disorder under control. The country's most senior officer tonight appealing for calm.
The why and the motive behind this is a very principal part of our investigation, and that's what we're seeking to determine. At the meantime, then, we've also got pretty serious public order problems to deal with in the city tonight. And those things are disgraceful, and which people calm down, go home, and allow us actually conduct our duties and our investigations properly.
It all stemmed from this, a lunchtime knife attack with no immediate motive outside a primary school on Parnell Square. Horrified eyewitnesses rushed to intervene.
Well, there was a man and he was leaning over children and he was stabbing them. So when we got over there, we just jumped in and got a hold of the man and put him to the ground.
In the bedlam, 3 young children aged 5 and 6 were injured, one 5-year-old girl seriously. A woman in her 30s was also injured. The man, subdued by both witnesses and the police, was taken to hospital. The attack was condemned across the political spectrum, the horror etched on the face of even seasoned leaders.
This is the last thing that you expect to happen on a Thursday afternoon in the middle of Dublin city. It's a great school community and people's hearts are with the children who have been traumatised, those who have been injured, and we pray for their full recovery.
Police are this evening crediting the bystanders from preventing the situation being even worse.
I'm not a hero. No way am I a hero. I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother. I'm a Dublin lady, you know what I mean? I do believe that our city shouldn't be like this. Our children should be safe.
But the actions of Dublin's heroes have now been eclipsed by the actions of what the Garda Commissioner called its hooligan faction, driven by far-right ideology.
And Stephen joins us now from Dublin, and plenty of unanswered questions still tonight, Stephen. But are the streets now calm?
There's a greater sense of calm than there was certainly an hour or so ago, but there is still an incredibly heavy police presence on the streets of Dublin at the moment, and essentially large swathes of inner city Dublin are still on complete lockdown. You can hear helicopters above us, and there's still a very heavy Garda or the Irish Police Service presence, and that is O'Connell Street, which is effectively the Irish capital's main thoroughfare. And it was on O'Connell Street earlier that we saw scenes of violence, the likes of which I hadn't seen in Dublin city centre for many years, with double-decker buses being set on fire, trams being set on fire, police vehicles being set on fire. We saw rioters firing fireworks at public order unit police officers from very close range, and I have been told this evening that there are a number of injuries to Garda members, although they won't confirm just how many, and they cannot confirm at this stage how many arrests have been made, and that is because it is still very much a live policing operation. But certainly it feels a bit calmer here in Dublin city centre than it has done earlier this evening.
Stephen, they're in Dublin. Thank you.
Good evening from Jerusalem, where tonight, after delays and setbacks, it seems that a truce between Israel and Hamas will come into effect tomorrow. At a news conference in Qatar, it was announced both sides have agreed fighting will stop at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning UK time. The ceasefire is expected to last for 4 days, with the gradual release of 50 hostages held by Hamas in return for 150 Palestinian prisoners being given their freedom. Our international affairs editor Dominic Waghorn reports from Tel Aviv.
Their faces have stared out from posters for almost 7 weeks in Tel Aviv's Hostage Plaza and far beyond. How many will we now see come home? In Qatar, the hostage mediators were sounding positive.
We are hoping that momentum will carry and that we would find this would open the door for further and more deep negotiations towards an end to this violence.
They set out the details of the exchange.
They will be 13 in number, all women and children, and those hostages who are from the same families will be put together within the same patch. Obviously, every day will include a number of civilians, as agreed, to total 50 within the 4 days.
British Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron became the latest visitor to Israel to be shown the aftermath of the October attacks in Kibbutz Be'eri, which saw some of the worst atrocities. Later, meeting Israel's Prime Minister, he highlighted the plight of British people taken to Gaza that day.
I hope everyone who's responsible and behind this agreement can make it happen to bring relief to those families, including, of course, there are British nationals who've been taken hostage. And so let's hope that can be delivered.
For every Israeli hostage released from Gaza, 3 Palestinian prisoners will be let out of Israeli jails. Some sent home through this crossing into the West Bank, others to East Jerusalem. For Israelis, they're terrorists. To Palestinians, they're heroes of the resistance against Israel's occupation.
I hope that all the prisoners will be released and that the resistance will succeed in freeing all the prisoners from Israeli prisons, as they honestly suffer from oppression and mistreatment by Israeli occupying forces.
In Tel Aviv, a quieter day as people wait and hope the ceasefire will hold and bring back many of the missing. But relatives of male hostages know there's no chance this round will do anything for them.
My son is not on the list. He's 46 years old, and I hope that he is in a healthy situation that allows him to withstand all the hardship that is there, that they didn't wound him, didn't torture him, and didn't do things that are inhuman. And I believe that he will handle that and will return healthy and in one piece.
Even before the ceasefire, the mood here is subdued as Israel holds its breath. No one here is under much illusion that this truce can be anything but temporary. The government says it wants to obliterate Hamas, and many Israelis expect it to try and do so. But before the war can resume in earnest, they hope there is the chance of bringing home the women and children. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News in Tel Aviv.
Well, in Gaza, there's been no let-up in the fighting as Israel continues its military offensive ahead of that truce. Today, the director of Al-Shifa Hospital has been detained by Israeli authorities who say they have evidence the building was a Hamas command centre, something Hamas itself has long denied. Our special correspondent, Alex Crawford, has the latest and a warning her report contains distressing images.
The truce delay has hit Gaza's children most. The bleeding and the pain goes on. The doctors in the Gaza European Hospital filmed these pictures for us. All these children were brought in just before we spoke. The situation's now critical, they say, after the Indonesian and Al-Shifa hospitals were bombed out of action.
Their mother in very bad situation, they are in ICU now.
And he told me others had even worse wounds.
He was a child of 3 years old, and his skull was broken, and his brain matter was out, and it was an infected wound, and he was alive. You can imagine.
This is the countdown to ceasefire. Filled with death and panic in the Strip. Scrambling to save lives as the Israeli airstrikes have continued. They've been pounding Khan Yunis, where the Gazans were told to flee to. Misery and fear doesn't come much more raw than this.
Even before the four-day lull, the Israeli defense minister was warning his soldiers will be back, telling his troops to prepare for another 2 months of fighting after the pause. The IDF filmed this footage of tunnels, claiming it's evidence of extensive terrorist activity in Al-Shifa hospital, and arrested its director, prompting other hospital directors in Gaza to call for international intervention to protect them.
He will be just in the jail. He'll be in the prison. This is unbelievable, unacceptable. And I do believe that all the international community should stand against this criminal and shout loudly that this should not happen to the hospital and to the hospital managers, to the hospital directors. This is a crime.
As the wounded from Al-Shifa arrived at his hospital, more sounds of bombings. The truce will allow more aid in to help these people. But their injuries are extensive and the numbers suffering from them huge. We are drowning here, the doctors told us. Alex Crawford, Sky News.
Well, it's about 20 past midnight here in Israel, and the anxious wait for the families of the Israelis waiting for 13 people to be released tomorrow continues, as well as for the Palestinian families who are waiting for the women and children they're expecting to be released from Israeli prisons. There's no certainties. It remains very fragile. There isn't much trust between the two sides, but we'll have to wait and see, as around 7 o'clock in the morning, the ceasefire is expected to come into effect. And later tomorrow afternoon, we're expecting to see the first of those hostages emerge. We will be following all of the developments here on Sky News with special coverage tomorrow with me here in Jerusalem. But for now, back to you, Anna, in London.
Yalda, thank you. Now, the far-right leader, Geert Wilders, celebrated his victory in Holland's election today with his party's new MPs. They now form the biggest group in the country's parliament by a considerable margin. The UK government once tried to ban Wilders, but he's now riding high on electoral success, achieved by promising to stop immigration and to hold a referendum on EU membership. Sky's Europe correspondent, Adam Parsons, has been speaking to people in Rotterdam.
Greeted like a hero. Geert Wilders has spent decades waiting to win an election, and now his moment has come. This was a meeting of a parliamentary party that has suddenly doubled in size. In reality, it was a celebration. Whether you call him a populist, a radical or a troublemaker, he now leads the biggest party in the Dutch parliament.
What is the one thing you would like to do to change your country?
One of the most important things we would like to do is, of course, to limit the influx of asylum and migration. That is one of the main themes that our campaign has tackled. That was certainly not the only theme. It's also been about welfare. People having more money in their pockets, receiving decent and affordable care, including the elderly.
He will now try to form a coalition, and that won't be easy. Many parties refuse to work with Wilders, but make no mistake, this was a seismic victory, and Wilders wants to be Prime Minister. Elsewhere, shock and anxiety. For decades, Wilders has made life uncomfortable for Dutch Muslims. He's compared the Quran to Mein Kampf and says he wants to ban mosques. That's left some feeling isolated, nervous about being ostracised. But others think Wilders is more about bluster than genuine threat.
If I have a Dutch, we call that a Dutch identity card, like this, you know, let me say this is my passport. I have a passport. You can send me back to Turkey or Morocco or Algeria. It's not possible.
A lot of the people we've spoken to here have told us that they didn't vote, that they think politicians ignore them or forget about them, that they won't do anything anyway. But the ones who did vote tended to go for Wilders. He tapped into the idea that social problems can be traced back to immigration, and this time it resonated.
He's my brother, he lives here in Netherlands. He doesn't have a house. But if somebody from other place come to here, they get a house immediately. You know what I'm saying? And that's what I think is the problem.
This is the latest in a line of victories for Europe's populist politicians. Wilders has spent decades as an outsider. Now he's come in from the cold. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Rotterdam.
A former inmate of a women's prison in Gloucestershire has told Sky News of alleged abuse of power by male officers against female prisoners. Her account appears to correspond with a review of women's prisons, which found services across 12 institutions in England are not equipped to provide the necessary care for inmates with mental health problems. Well, this report from our home editor, Jason Farrell, contains discussion of self-harm.
OK, so 14th to the 5th, cell 19, after lunch at 12:30, two officers were arguing with her. She was not violent. They restrained her. She was still not violent. The SO kicked her and the alarm was sounded. There were 7 officers in the end, all male, all restraining her inside her cell. No officers put the body cams on, kicked her in the chest.
Scarlett's diary of her 4 months inside a women's jail is a rare, shocking account of mostly male prison officers abusing their power over women. That extract was the alleged treatment of a youth offender in a next-door cell.
She repeatedly screamed for them to stop. They folded her in two. They brought her arms up behind her back until she was screaming. She was in pain. And then the senior officer kicked her in her chest right before they closed the door. And they didn't let her out for 48 hours.
Scarlett was jailed here in HMP Eastwood Park in Gloucestershire last year for perverting the course of justice. She says male staff used disproportionate force and things like withdrawing meals as punishment. She said prisoner self-harm was rife and officers showed no compassion.
There was one lady, she had self-harmed significantly. There was a lot of blood and they didn't dress the wound. They didn't cover it up. She was bleeding and they gave her a bowl to bleed in. Overnight, they were like, there you go.
A damning inspectorate report this year said Eastwood Park had extreme levels of self-harm and acute staff shortages. It stated the number of times force had been used against women had increased significantly, and we were not confident it was always used as a last resort.
The report said the cells were appalling, dilapidated, graffitied, one was blood splattered, and providing photographs, it said that some of them had extensive scratches on the walls, which reflected the degree of trauma previous residents must have experienced. It adds no prisoner should be held in such conditions, let alone women who were acutely unwell and in great distress.
The conditions are so inhumane. You are caged for 23 hours a day. And that's if there's enough staff to even let you out for 1 hour. And in a space that I couldn't even open my arms like this. I mean, the bed was here and the wall was here. You can't even open your arms. And there's one other person in that space. That's going to drive you to some quite crazy behaviours.
A new government report has been published recognising that women prisoners have unique needs and many are living with trauma, and recommending they have better access to therapeutic services. But Scarlett says the service needs much greater reform.
It's a cage. it's being put in the crumbling building. You're watching your life fall apart and there's nothing you can do.
Commenting on this interview, a prison service spokesperson said, "We are investing up to £14 million to improve the safety and rehabilitation of women so they can turn their backs on crime for good, including specialist self-harm training for staff, improved mental health services and help into work on release." But this former prisoner believes from her experience the whole system is not fit for purpose. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Chinese authorities say there have been no detections of unusual or novel pathogens after the World Health Organization made an official request for information about a recent spike in respiratory infections. Well, the UN Health Agency said it is unclear whether cases of undiagnosed pneumonia in children in northern China are linked to the rise in infections. New flu strains and other viruses capable of triggering pandemics usually stem from undiagnosed clusters. But other scientists say, well, the situation should be closely monitored. They are not convinced it signals the start of a new global outbreak. Dramatic images show the moment a crane operator saved a workman trapped on a burning building in Reading this morning. Glenn Edwards said he saw the man stuck on the edge of the Station Hill development, which was engulfed by smoke and flames, and manoeuvred a cage onto the roof. Well, the man managed to scramble into the cage and was winched to safety. Firefighters say a second man was rescued by the crane, and both were taken to hospital for treatment for smoke inhalation. Now, Sky News at 10 isn't quite over, and we end not with a large person singing, but with opera in the Yorkshire dialect, specifically a new production of Rossini's Barber of Seville, as you've never heard it before. And it is set to open the first Bradford Opera Festival. Our arts and entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer explains all.
A reet-good reinvention of Rossini's classic. By Eckers translating the Barber of Seville into Yorkshire been challenging, particularly for Figaro.
Weaving surprises when a bloke rises. Right to the top, right to the top.
Were you familiar with the Yorkshire dialect?
My only familiarity comes with listening to cricket in India, cricket commentary, Jeffrey Boycott.
Right.
In Hindi, in India, we have the same flat vowels without diphthongs. Yeah. But the things that stand up, like cup becomes cup, you know, I'm trying to get those.
In part, it's hoped this is an antidote to the typically hackneyed portrayals of Yorkshire-sounding characters on stage.
I've seen too many Shakespeare plays where the thick character comes on and they give him some like yokel accent, that an accent is used to donate, it's sort of like to donate some sort of like lesser character. I do care that we do it with some integrity. Even though it's fun, even though it's interesting, it's a decent work of art with it.
Will that do it?
Nay, it's not great. Soon to leave the rehearsal rooms, the production is opening the inaugural Bradford Opera Festival, an idea which came about in 2017 after this free staging of Romeo and Juliet set out of rival ice cream vans proved popular.
If opera carries on and the demographic of people who are making it and the demographic of people who are watching it just gets narrower and narrower, it will die. If we're not doing this now, we will not have the writers, the composers to create work that is meaningful and relevant.
Well, I tell thee that it is writ. Concentrate and you'll certainly hear some lyrics which make you sit up and listen.
I didn't know about missen, this'n, and myself, yourself. And I was like, missen? This'n. And does it mean this one? You have to get into the groove. Once you're there with your vowel sounds, then yeah, it's fine. It reminds you a little bit of Russian, actually.
While daring to mess with the classic might be risky, organisers hope it's a chance to say ta-ra to the typical stuffiness often associated with opera. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we will take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. And among the stories we will be discussing, this on the front of the Daily Telegraph, their headline, Cabinet pressure on Sunak to slash migration. Back with that and more after this. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. Net migration figures for last year have been revised up to a record high of 745,000 people. Police in Dublin have blamed a lunatic faction driven by far-right ideology for violence, which followed a knife attack in which a woman and 3 young children were injured. And Qatar has said Hamas will release more than a dozen Israeli hostages tomorrow as a 4-day truce is set to begin in Gaza. Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. Welcome to both of you. With us from now until just before midnight. Lots to discuss. So let's take a look at the front pages then, starting with the Metro. An image of the rescue of a man from a burning building in Reading dominates the front page of the Metro. The Financial Times, meanwhile, leads with the record net immigration figures and says Rishi Sunak is facing mounting political pressure. That is also the main story for The Telegraph, which reports the PM's cabinet colleagues want him to act. The Times reports the Treasury was alarmed by the revised immigration figures. The Eye claims there's a battle in cabinet with the Department of Health clashing with the Home Office over the demand for a crackdown on care worker visas. Suella Braverman saying the record levels of net migration are a slap in the face to the British public is the main story for the Daily Express. The Mirror's front page features an image of the Prime Minister with the headline, "Make it stop," and claims the Tories are breaking Britain. The Sun reports Danny Cipriani has joined Strictly's Christmas special days after his marriage split. And finally, The Star claims daft boffins fear they might have created killer robots. A reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers for yourself while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to Steve Richards and Salma Shah. Welcome to you. Migration figures, absolutely fascinating. The British public with multiple questions. You know, who are these people? Why are they coming? And are they likely to stay? Do we know the answers to those questions, Salma?
On these figures, no, that's not going to give us that sort of level of detail, but nonetheless, they are interesting questions because they always play into bigger economic questions around what does this mean for jobs, what does this mean in terms of UK skills, what does this mean in terms of infrastructure and service delivery and the pressures that are on service delivery. So I think those overall figures are incredibly frightening to a lot of people, especially because we were supposed to be in an era where we were having lower migration as a consequence of Brexit.
Yes. I mean, I was talking earlier about David Cameron promising tens of thousands. You know, here we are into the 700,000. You know, what in people's minds has gone wrong? Or is it a good thing because we know we've got a shortage of people to fill the very many vacancies this country has?
Yeah, the fact that you're asking these questions, which are slightly contradictory, just shows how complex and layered it is. There is an issue, which I think will be the main one around in the coming days, of trust. Because, as you say, Cameron promised that, he never got near it. But the referendum on Brexit was all about taking back control of the borders. And then the December 2019 Tory election campaign was partly about getting immigration down. And then we get these huge figures. So there's an issue about trust because politicians pretend all the time that they're going to get them down. And yet it's much harder than that. But so there's a trust issue, but then there's also the substance issue, as you and Salma were suggesting, which is, well, hold on, are lots of people coming here because we need them to fill the gaps in the labour market? And that thing you highlighted, the clash between the Department of Health and the Treasury, is not the Treasury, the Home Office, is one vivid example.
But it's interesting that you say trust, because we're looking at the front page of the Financial Times. We've got this huge immigration headline, and right next to it, you've got a right-wing leader in the Netherlands who's just claimed a victory. And those things are very cleverly juxtaposed on the front page of the FT because this is what we're facing, that sort of challenge, where the right wing are going to talk about the tsunami of asylum seekers and immigration.
Well, I mean, this is your specialist area, Salma, isn't it? Because you worked in the Home Office under Sajid Javid when he was Home Secretary. What were the sort of competing problems and issues you had there in order to try and, submerge the migration figures while still actually get people in who need to do jobs, even if they're seasonal workers, for example?
Well, the whole idea around the immigration white paper that we put forward, which was changed substantially under Boris Johnson, was that we would be picking and choosing the kinds of people that we wanted in to fill particular roles.
Did you want a points-based system at that
No,
time?
we did. So a points-based system changes the immigration system to favour the person who's choosing to come here and puts the power in the individual's hands, whereas the system that we essentially had was about the government deciding what the economy actually needed. And so, as Steve rightly says, on the front page of the Eye, you're talking about that clash between the Health Secretary, well, not the Health Secretary, the Health Department and the Home Office. And that is an old discussion and a clash that's always happened because the NHS really needs those support staff and it doesn't get it in the UK market. The numbers thing has always been difficult because David Cameron set out that tens of thousands target. It was never reached. And for a long time, people talked about the free movement from Europe. And that was one of the big challenges around the Brexit debate. I think the issue now is we've come out, we don't have free movement, but the numbers are still going up. Why is that? It's because we're now seeing really what we need in terms of skills in the economy. And because freedom of movement isn't there and we're logging it for the first time, we're actually really seeing what that free movement meant.
And we know that Ukraine and Hong Kong have skewed the figures, but the numbers are driven by India and Nigeria, social care being a main element of it, and the health service as well. So is that, as some have suggested, a failure to recruit and pay properly in those sectors of public service, do you think, Steve?
Well, again, this is so interesting, because do you remember a couple of years ago when Boris Johnson was still Prime Minister, there were those lorry strikes and huge petrol queues one autumn when he was Prime Minister. And he said, this is great news, because we're going to have to recruit within Britain, wages will go up, and this is all part of, post-Brexit Britain. He was sounding actually like sort of Tony Benn, a figure from the left in the 70s and 80s, who used to argue for import controls because people could get paid more here. So there is that argument. However, look at these figures. Clearly, there is a demand for labour that isn't being met in this country. And I wonder whether the trust issue could be addressed if politicians were just more honest about this, instead of pretending it's down to tens of thousands. Yeah. We need these people. We're obviously not getting them now from Eastern Europe as much freedom of movement has gone within the EU. But clearly we still need the people. And that bit is the bit where trust, it seems to me, breaks down. Because if people hear all the time, we're going to take control of the border, no one's going to come here, and then they see these figures, they're alarmed. Yeah. But there are reasons, aren't there, for a lot of it? Yeah, but I also think that there is an interesting point, which is why are people in the domestic market not filling these positions?
Well, are we a post-industrial economic power where you no longer do certain jobs? And is it that simple for people, do you think, or not? Or is it simply they're not well paid enough to do it?
Well, I mean, that would make sense if we weren't talking about a stagnating economy and the fact that wages are quite low. So you can't, whilst you don't want to have this argument about immigration driving prices down, I think there is truth in the fact that there is downward pressure on wages as a consequence of cheaper labour that comes in. Now, the problem with the fact that we don't have freedom of movement anymore means that actually going through the rigmarole and the process of trying to recruit someone from abroad is a little bit more expensive. So actually, there's this terrible cycle of everything in this supply chain getting that much more difficult.
And that's another layer of this. We're in a sort of flatlining economy where there are actually loads of jobs available. In a lot of sort of economic downturns, unemployment is a big feature. But here you can't move but for seeing vacancies for jobs. but they're not being filled.
Yeah, let's have a look at how the papers are continuing. I mean, it's the main story, obviously. The Daily Telegraph as well, cabinet pressure on Sunak to slash migration, quoting the new Conservatives group of around 20 MPs, failing to deliver on this issue is more serious than failing to cut taxes or taking too long to build hospitals. Mass migration is changing the nature of Britain forever. So that is a community cohesion question. Yeah. Daily Express, failure to halt migration is a slap in the face for the public. Suella Braverman, who's forgotten she was Home Secretary until recently, clearly. But the question is, I suppose, if you're seeing 750,000 people coming in, if they didn't come in, would we not need to build 300,000 new homes on, Britain's green and pleasant land? That's how, some in the Shires might be asking this question.
I think that's too rudimentary to make that sort of comparison. But where I think it is really important that we engage in this debate is around that public service pressure question, but also that cultural cohesion question. Because for far too long, I think we've ignored the fact that people are very worried about this, and in certain communities, people are very worried about this, and it's allowed this to become a real sort of political dividing line. So whilst I think the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, it's quite rich that she's talking about a slap in the face for the public, because it was her responsibility until literally weeks ago. I think if we don't address the fact that actually there are cultural issues that come as a consequence of immigration around people adapting to a British way of life, whatever that might mean for a lot of people, and the fact that there are pressures, then I think it's going to be problematic.
Steve, I know you want to continue. We haven't even got to the prospect of a snap election, which we'll do in a moment. And also coming up, it's not big and it's not cleverly. The Home Secretary denies swearing in Parliament. Back in just a moment.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
It's turning everybody into, a crazy, violent drug addict.
How are you feeling?
I am angry. Legal abortion! It is an anti-woman agenda.
2 women say that you paid for their abortions. Are you a hypocrite, sir? Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
I gotta be realistic. My sister's dead.
More than 4 weeks on, there's no murder weapon and no suspect. Are you going to catch this killer?
We are doing everything we can.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
We're so excited.
Severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
I've watched as whole towns were torn apart by natural disaster.
I'm alive and I'm thankful for that, but there are a lot of people who aren't.
It's not the winds people fear most here, it's the water. We take you to the heart of the stories which shape our world. Do you truly believe what you're saying?
A lot of cases that I know are reported from Ukrainian missiles themselves.
Ambassador, with respect, I think that's preposterous.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent.
5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me now, Steve Richards and Salma Shah. One for you, Steve. I know you're interested in this. I shall read the Telegraph headline. Snap election speculation as the Treasury mulls an early budget. Take it away.
Yeah, I think this is interesting because I doubt if Sunak has a clue when he's going to hold this election. But he wants options next year. And therefore, the Telegraph piece is about bringing the budget forward, possibly. It's normally in March. Speculation that might be earlier, although they then say, no, it will be in March. And obviously this was triggered because the national insurance cut is coming in January rather than the start of the new financial year. That doesn't mean it's going to be May. It just means they want as much of this kind of stuff to filter through as early as possible in the hope that May just becomes an option. But it could still well be the autumn. I think that's the most likely time. But the reason why that's significant, it's on the front page of the Telegraph, is that Rishi Sunak has the privilege of deciding when this election will be. He's also got the hell of trying to control this narrative. So whenever
I thought you were going to say control his own party then.
Well, that is another layer of this story. So whenever he's interviewed, when you do him on Sky, when he's on other outlets, he's going to be asked, so what about May? Will you rule that out? And if he says no constantly, that will stir, he's thinking of May. And then if he then doesn't do it, he looks weak. So although he's in control of when he decides to call it, he's going to lose control of that narrative if it's on the front pages already.
I feel like Gordon Brown in 2010, don't you think?
Exactly,
for that one? In the meantime, Mr. Cleverly, our new Home Secretary, getting himself in a bit of a pickle.
Yes, he has used some unparliamentary language, and there is some discussion about whether he was referring to an opposition member's constituency or the actual opposition member himself. And the Home Secretary is saying that he used derogatory language about an individual and not about a town. And as you can imagine, the town of Stockton is in uproar as a consequence of the fact that he may possibly have used some bad language about it.
The question was, why do so many in my constituency, how many children live in poverty? And the suggestion was, he said, because it's a... God, I really should say it this time night, shouldn't I? Not really, it runs in the morning. Quick word as well from The Guardian, if you don't mind, looking ahead to Gaza. The ceasefire to start this morning. Obviously, we're looking at Friday's papers here. So, hopefully, after a 24-hour delay, it will, Steve.
Yeah, it looks like it. It was a bit nerve-wracking this morning when we heard there were problems. You thought, well, problems tend to lead to more problems. But it appears to be going tomorrow. And then very quickly the question will arise, and then what? But obviously there will be this good news story tomorrow morning unless it all goes wrong again.
Yeah, but obviously as a consequence we're seeing more intensive fire in Palestine at the moment, so that ceasefire cannot come soon enough.
OK, both of you, thank you very much indeed. We will see you for the 11th. Steve Richards, Salma Shah, thank you. Here's the weather.